Hey everybody, this is Paul from the Green Chutes. With me is my awesome co-host Walt, and we're here today recording Green Chutes podcast number 3. And before we kick things off into the main topic of our conversation, just not to bring things down on the podcast, but we did lose a couple of icons recently. Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath and is singing on his own as well too, and then Hulk Hogan from wrestling fame and Malcolm Jamal Warner. I don't know if you've ever watched the Cosby Show, Walt, but he played the son on the Cosby Show there. So a lot of icons from the 80s and 90s here that I don't know about you, but growing up, I can't say I was like a huge fan of Ozzy Osbourne. I definitely appreciated him, but his music style and singing style. He was obviously a legend. Losses for the three of those, and you had any memories or anything you want to share about any of the three that come to your mind?
Well, yeah, definitely a sad day for Hulkamaniacs and wrestling fans. And I got into it when Vice launched that Dark Side of the Ring show, and I started watching wrestling. So definitely someone that changed the face and blew up wrestling, world famous. It's I still have his America theme ringing in my brain right now, right? So definitely a sad day there. But yeah, Ozzy Osbourne. It's always sad when you lose it when we lose anybody.
Yeah,
And especially how so. Hulk Hogan was 71, and Ozzy Osbourne in his 70s or 80s
I
maybe.
think he's 76. Yeah,
Gotcha. So
yep. And
yeah,
then
it's
Malcolm Jamal Warner, a little younger though, in his 50s. Or that it was more of a freak accident, swimming accident. Unfortunate for his family.
yeah. Um, it's still very that's the most tragic one I think because he was so young.
Yeah, he
Um,
had a young kid too.
yeah, yeah, and I think he'd been on a lot more recent shows. Like I'd recognize his face even from not just from the Cosby Show when he was younger, but from more recent things. So, um, yeah, a lot of losses. I think definitely multi-generational though for a lot of them.
Yeah,
So, Ozzy Osbourne going into reality the
yeah,
TV show later, and so yeah, very, very, very tragic when we lose people, and hopefully they were all, prepared for the future and had their family set up and had their assets secured, like what we'll talk a little bit about today.
yeah. I
So
mean, that's the main topic for today's podcast, and that's wealth, building wealth. I guess the first thing is too, wealth is kind of a, just in and of itself, it can be a nebulous concept. I've written an article in the past on it in terms of like, you could have, you could be in one country. Let's say, for example, you're in North Korea and you got $1 million of whatever their equivalent currency is. You might be wealthy over there relatively, but then you if you were to say take that currency and bring it to the U.S., it's worthless. So wealth is relative. There are ways to kind of convert that wealth. And give me your thoughts on wealth. What do you think wealth is? What does it mean? And how do you approach it?
well, I think you brought up a really interesting point that I think just bringing North Korea up. Because investors want to have their money in places where it's protected and secured. So, would I trade my lowly and meager position in the U.S. economy to be this, grand czar person under the Kim family in North Korea? Absolutely not. Even if they offered you everything in the world because they control, there's no law. There's not a multi-generational system of law and order in a lot of places around the world, and you're more prone to corruption. And I think we still have. I'm not going to be a person that doesn't admit that we don't have bad corruption in the United States, but smart people in the United States can protect their wealth, and they can use the tax code to the same benefit as very wealthy people. So, use real estate the same way, leverage assets the same way, to a large extent. So long as those doors are kept open and things are fair and equitable, which is why I think ultimately the United States and real estate in the United States, bonds tied to real estate in the United States, is always going to be a safe investment from the perspective of a lot of people.
Yeah,
So
yeah. With North Korea, I mean, you've got that, like you mentioned, it's a harsher regime. It's a dictatorship. So basically, if you fall out of favor, whatever wealth you had, it could be ended within a second. When the leader, dear leader, decides to take you out. We've seen situations like that, not just in North Korea and Russia as well too. There have been some high-level people who've been disappeared. So it's there. It's so like you mentioned with the U.S., we do have these laws in there. So at our lower level, the laws are I'd say more favorable towards building wealth for the average person. When you get to the high levels in those other countries, that's where it gets risky. But here in the U.S., it's you've got rule of law. You live in good communities where they're protecting your property rights, and that way you can whenever you're making money, however you're making money, you're investing that in land, like you say. There's more than just aspects to wealth of having like a lot of money is in one way of looking at it. Yeah, money is great; it's part of the wealth, but at the same time, too, like we talked, currency is kind of, you know, that much money in North Korea is not worth the same amount here. So there's more to it than just wealth. It's the ability to, to feed yourself, to house yourself. A lot of people will say health is wealth. Good health is wealth. If you have bad health, then especially if you don't have good insurance or you don't have the money to pay for the doctors, then yeah, that it can get really go against you. So having good health, mental health, spiritual health, having family and friends surrounding you. I mean, that's a lot of things that intangible things that are part of being wealthy that aren't I don't think are really discussed by many.
I agree, and none of it really is, unfortunately. But that's, I think, more of the system that we've been placed upon. So, as far as, hey, you have to make money and you have to earn, and every dollar is the same as the next dollar. I just finished that show, The Vikings, on Netflix, and there's a scene where the main protagonist's son gets up and he says, "Hey, we've become very wealthy by doing all these raidings, and they were raids. They were Vikings going in and raiding along the English coast." And he had said, "What is the point of all this wealth? It's if not to fulfill your dreams." And I think it's all those things. You want to have freedom. You want your family to be healthy. You want to have security. I think all of that is what makes a person makes a person wealthy. So it's a conjunction of those things, because I see a lot of people that are my age that work for bigger corporations, or and they have great titles and they great benefits, and when they retire, they're going to have, they'll be able to do whatever they want, but they're trading, right? So are they really wealthy when they're giving so much time and so much health to a corporation that, as we're seeing right now with layoffs? I saw TikTok where a lady was laid off after 37 years, so longer than I'd been alive. And she got I think she took about a month to get over it, and then made the video. And I would just say we have to try to set our children up and our people up to where they have options, and that's really what wealth is to provide options, so people aren't stuck. I don't have to take this job, or I don't have to do it this way. I can my kids can go here to school, or there to school, or anywhere, because we've worked, and we can maneuver to make that a reality. You know,
Yeah,
so
yeah, it's a lot about it too. Like you talk about kids and other family. They talk about multi-generational wealth, which carries on, and so it's easy to say and easy to talk about, but not necessarily easy to build. I mean, a lot of that takes a lot of time and effort. Like you said, you're trading away your time depending on how much, you're valuing your time is, if you're in an employer, you're working at a job you like, and it's you're getting fulfillment out of that, then I suppose that's kind of a good way to keep things on track. But where some of those people are just kind of become, slaves to the money, there becomes this problematic, and a lot of times their health is affected. And it seems too that almost you've seen a number of cases like this too, where people just, okay, they're done, they retired, or they can't physically do it anymore, and then suddenly after that they just keel over, and not after that, it's all over basically. So they might have earned that there for their family members, or for the tax person in this case, but not necessarily being able to enjoy it while they were, in the process of earning it as well too.
I think the foundation of wealth is truly education. Um, Honestly, and I think it's that's the most important thing. And my grandmother recently passed away. She was 101.
Wow, sorry to hear that.
Um, yeah, but she lived a great life, and all her kids did well, and she stressed school so much. And that was really the reason, is because I think you have to have an open mind throughout your entire life, and as ways of securing wealth, or investing in new things, you have to constantly stay on top of all that. um it's a never ending struggle that we have to find ourselves in that position, because there's always elements of society, right, who will take an easy way, and they won't want to build. They'll see, hey, maybe we can raid this, or we can take this. And unfortunately, that happens every day. So
Yeah,
and it
you bring up a great point there with your grandmother talking about education. And I think it's a key thing that a lot of people also neglect when looking at wealth. It's having that. And there's education too, doesn't just have to mean like pencils, papers, and going through school. A lot of people we've seen, they get their education on the job, they're doing it on the fly, they're learning on the fly, and they become masters of their trade. So that happens with a lot of the tradespeople. We've seen a lot of some of these large startup companies too are started out by these garage founders. Steve Jobs comes to mind, who I don't believe he finished his college degree, did his high school obviously, and maybe some college, but just did everything, became extremely wealthy. And there's a number of, founders like that who taken that path. I think the Wendy's founder, who's passed away, but is similar. I think he just started straight out in the kitchen cooking, and then suddenly he built himself up a nice little restaurant empire. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast with Guy Fieri, same type of thing. He you know went to high school and then ended up saying, okay, wasn't for him, but then finished up his degree just in one of those secondary education schools just to get a degree. But education was the whole thing to him, and he just started on his own, running restaurants, had a knack for it, and just based on his knowledge. I mean, look at where he is now. He's got multiple restaurants around the U.S., TV show that pays him pretty well. So education is great for some, but it's not the end all be all, especially in these
Right.
days too, where I think the value of education is kind of overblown. Where a lot of universities provide the same kind of educational structure, the same classes, the same learning experience. You got to even have the same, unless you're just really looking for like a great football school, that might be your big difference. But going into huge amounts of debt to get a 4-year degree when you're a local school, you're in-state school, you could do that better. You can get the same education, you get that same knowledge. It's kind of also what you put into it too. I mean, if you just go in there and kind of be the mindless drone and don't really interact with the subjects, then yeah, chances are you're not going to really get that good, well-rounded education that sharpens your mind. Versus you go in there and you explore the topics, you debate with your teachers, you debate with your peers in a manner where you're kind of playing with the ideas and figuring them out. You're expanding your mind, as you mentioned there. You're opening your mind. That's going to give you the better opportunities. So then when you do come out into the real world and you need to look
Oh,
for a
yeah.
job, or you want to start a business, then that person is going to be much more ahead and able to build that wealth much faster compared to somebody who's a little more into that rigid framework. Either they're doing like that 9 to 5 or, whatever, and burning time that way.
And I mean too, not necessarily, formal education, but just in general, you're like
Learning, yeah.
it's a, lifelong learning. So everybody everybody, like, one thing for loan officers is you have to keep learning. You're going to have to constantly, people, you're going to have to, oh, this is going to change, that's going to change. You're going to have to remember that you can't, okay, well, we need this now instead of this document, and we have to disclose this way with this new form. um Everything, any sort of business ownership or real ownership, really solving problems, requires that constantly learning and constantly on the job, um, learning. So I think, yeah, a lot of the, we've talked about this in previous podcasts, but a lot of the technology and the emphasis on I think it's really disempowering people. Um, People thinking that things are going to be easy, or why should I work when, we're just going to all have universal basic income. Um, as one question, right, that young people might pose. And it's because you want to, don't you actually want to make the world better in a real way and build something. So
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, with AI, I kind of view that it's more of a tool, not necessarily like a crutch. If you're just going to use that for your thinking, put in the, questions in there, tell me what I should do, then definitely I think people will be at a disadvantage with that versus use it like any tool, especially with like, go back to the internet when it kind of first came up and then the search engines, you could use the search engine to find any kind of information. You have a issue with your health, you can't get to the doctor right away, it's nothing emergency or whatnot, but you go research online, they say, hey, try this. You try one or two remedies, you find one that works, you saved a lot of time there, you saved some money too, not having to visit our medical system, which is pretty painful at some points in time. So you save your money, you learn, and same thing with AI too. I believe is going to be, use it as a tool. Don't use it as your brain. You still use your brain. You use the tool just as you would a hammer to build a house. You use that tool in the proper way, then I think it'll multiply your efforts versus just kind of taking over your efforts.
right, and it just requires, it's another element that requires constant monitoring. Um, so even has been researching, AI a lot, and then United Wholesale has rolled out those assistants, Paul, those virtual assistants, and I've listened to some of the calls, and it's pretty scary. It's literally a person that's like having a full blown conversation on on my, my behalf, right? Hey, rates have dropped, and would you want to talk to Walt about, maybe saving some money? Sure, right? Like, it's like an unbelievable future, but I think at the end of the day, it comes down to how we use the technology, and I believe the human in the loop element of it is so critical and important, because the second we remove that, you have to have some sort of empathetic human, element in systems. So, and I think, when you talk about law and order, right, like we were talking about for investing earlier, your judges need to represent that, right, that empathy, where it's like there's a difference between somebody who is an experienced fraudster and that has done crime their whole life, and somebody that, goes into a retail spot and they're hungry for their family and they steal something. Correct. So there needs to be a different response, to different situations. But getting back to the wealth building thing, I think with the United States, what would have really concerned me over the past couple months would have been when, especially when you saw Elon Musk say negative things about President Trump. If President Trump, or if Elon Musk had essentially disappeared, as has happened with other, billionaires in other systems in the East, right? Alibaba, they, vanishes, becomes a teacher, so we didn't see any sort of thing like that where someone was seriously downgraded or shifted, outside of the greater public life. So I think that's a good thing. And regardless, there's always good and negative things. As we analyze and look at current events, we have to try to stay positive always.
Yeah. Yeah. So the current systems you live in, the current governments you have that can enhance your wealth at the same time too, it can take away your wealth as we've noted here. So it's always important that, when people are going and voting, that they understand who they're voting for and why they're voting for. Just casting your ballot because, hey, either your parents do it this way or you do what they call the straight ticket. You just, click one button and it votes every same one down the line without understanding. I think then you're losing focus there of what you're really voting for, and it's becoming more like a mechanical process versus, we I think everybody kind of needs to take a step back, go back to that process of, hey, why am I voting for this person? What do I think they'll help me with in terms of building my wealth? Or do I think this person might not help me with that? They might actually detract from that. So getting back to that critical thinking and analyzing and looking at this, I mean, we need to do that, an everyday process. You should be doing it more often, and especially when it comes to who you're voting to represent yourself. By looking at that and looking at them closely, is like, okay, is this person going to represent my best interests? Yes or no? And then that would be more, at least my thoughts on, part of that wealth. It's a long-term process. Nobody's saying it's going to happen overnight, but we've kind of set our own stage as well too by continually voting in the same politicians who are, you know, really more interested in their own wealth rather than everybody else's.
Right? And they're just robbing and stealing, and they come in, they come in with a few $100,000 net worth, and they leave multimillionaires. It's absolutely frustrating. And I think it's a common thing all over the world where you have that sort of entitlement. Well, hey, I've worked up my way and I represent this, so I'm gonna grease my own palms. I think unfortunately the only solution is to have different representatives and different younger people that have actually done things and built things and have real experience, and aren't indebted to um, old money, if you will, and old interests. So, because I think if we we continue to look at the old way of doing things collectively and nationally, I think wealth building could severely be stifled or stopped. And a nightmare I always have is capital markets just totally seizing up. I've heard about people in 2008 that I've worked with, and one day they had deals and they were under contract, and people were expecting financing, and then it just stopped. Hey, we can't do it. The doors are shut. So what would that look like? And that's where it's just every day you got to be grateful to use skills that you have to help people. So regardless of what the forum is or the avenue is, because I think that's a big way of wealth building as well, is um, by lifting other people up. You strengthen your position as well, and not it. Besides it being the right thing to do, that's just maybe a strategic or tactical way to do it, is to just, well, I'm gonna help the people that were loyal and stuck by me and helped me, and I'm gonna pay them and help them.
Pay it
So
forward. Yeah.
definitely, I think that's a big part of wealth building. Just like time control, discipline, um, staying on top of things. If you're a family, having things delegated, so that nobody steps on the other person's toes, and different people have liberty and freedom to make their own choices. But then there's a collective choice, right, for husband and wife or family to make. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
I've heard the phrase get more by giving. So it's, as long as we're out there, we're contributing more, then it should be coming back to us as well too, in terms of, even what, if you want to call it like a natural law, or just being a good person, saying giving in what you can give, and then
I
you'll get
I
you'll
think it's 100% true. I
you'll
think it's
receive in
just,
return.
yeah, the universe responds to energy. So if you're shining and you're willing to give, and all right, I'm gonna help who I can. Um, it is strange because there's a lot of times in my career and in my life where I felt like giving up, right? And then man, I should go and do this or do that, and start over somewhere else. And then you get a phone call, and it's something like that from something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I hear you on that. All right. I think that's a wrap for today. You got any final thoughts, final comments that you want to share?
um just despite losing role models this week, I think everybody, Hulk Hogan especially, right? He had his share of controversy, and everybody does. And I think this week is just about, we're all human beings. People make mistakes, but we can come together and we can help each other and answer questions honestly about, hey, if I'm in this situation, or Walt, if you were in that situation, how would you do this? So that's what I think everybody can do as we think about these people that change music and change entertainment. We can change things as well ourselves, just as individuals, by carrying ourselves a different way, which those guys did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. We can remember them for the good times as well too, that to help carry us when we need that.
yeah.
All right.
All right,
Thanks.
Paul.
We'll see you on the next one.
Yes, have a great week, guys.